Good evening, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. Before I get started, no, I did not get a new vehicle. This is my wife's car. I drove it into Bingo. I'm going to go call Bingo here in just a few minutes. So, okay. Just wanted to, make that clear for everybody. No, I did not get a new vehicle. All right. Wanted to talk a little bit about how it is that we give meaning to whatever it is that we hear. Like the story that we hear, the meaning that we give it is like the meaning and the reality that comes from that. So this is the way that we begin to see things. And a lot of times when we hear a story, like we read a news article and we get the information within it, we take on this perception of what it is that that article has given, because this is the first time we're getting this information. And as we receive it, we begin to give meaning to this particular information, and therefore it becomes the belief that we have. Now, unless you think differently ahead of time or know differently, then this is the reality that is in existence. No matter what, that is going to be the reality. So regardless of what the situation is, the information that you receive and the meaning that you give it will give you the reality that you are looking at. So this is a prime example of how this information comes to us, and then we begin to give it the meaning behind that information, which then begins to guide our thoughts and then dictates our realities. Okay, now I know this sounds kind of really out there, kind of esoteric thinking kind of stuff, but now follow me on this, right? Because here's an article talking about retail stores closing, and the reason why they're closing is because of theft. But then when the investigation is done, they find that there is not nearly as many calls, criminal activity calls to the police going into these particular retail facilities as places that are not closing down. So they're saying, well, this isn't fair, essentially, is what the article I think would imply. Is that it's not because of crime, because if it was crime, then you would see these reports coming in. This is the only data that we can use in order to come up with evidence to conclude whether or not this is like appropriate closing of the store. I mean, I'm not sure how else to say it, but that's kind of like the idea behind what the article is suggesting. But what the article doesn't understand is that the crime just doesn't go reported anymore. They just simply give up. Now, hear me out on this, right? Because if you're in an area, say you're in a particular area that doesn't necessarily have a lot of crime, it's a low crime, place. And the employees there are not necessarily used to seeing a lot of crime taking place. So when they see it, it's quite shocking, and they try to stop it from happening, generally call the police or, do some sort of intervention. When the crime becomes so prevalent, the employees just don't even care anymore. Like, they don't stop it. They don't even attempt to stop it. It's just, they just literally watch them walk out. They might say something to them, but then that's it. Like, that's it. Nothing else. And although, you see plenty of videos out there of, people trying to stop people from stealing and stuff like that, like employees, like literally confronting, theft and, getting into, fights and whatever. But in a lot of areas, it just simply just is allowed. Like, not necessarily allowed, but just tolerated and not dealt with. And nobody gets called. Even if the police do get called, they don't show up. Right? So this is the places that a lot of these stores now have to shut down their facilities. And this is the reason why. And it's not going to go reported. So now if we think about it, it was just like, okay, so really, even places like I'm talking about, like the Portland area, which seems to have really two classes of people now, right? Rich and poor. There's a huge separation between the two. We're finding a lot of homeless. They're blaming this on the decriminalization of drugs. See, here in Oregon, it's no longer a crime to have a small amount of illegal narcotics, right? A lot of people call this legalized. It's not the same thing. It's been decriminalized, meaning that you don't get in trouble for it. It's not necessarily legal, meaning like you can actually go down to a store and buy it or something like that. It's still illegal in that sense, right? But it's not illegal to have possession. And it's not something that, this is something that a lot of people get confused on, because it doesn't increase the amount of drug use. People want to say that it does, and they're going to be like shaking their heads and like, all these reports are coming out or whatever. Nah, it doesn't increase drug use. The people who are going to do drugs were going to do drugs anyway. You have to understand that part of it, right? What this has done is it's exposed it so you can actually see it now taking place. This is a real problem, and it always has been. And by covering it up, by making it illegal, by pushing people into, into the corners and stuff like that, you can get it out of sight, but it doesn't make it go away, right? That's the difference with inside of this, right? So people are like, yeah, it's out of our control anymore. Yeah, it finally surfaced that we now have to do something about this, right? That's what it comes down to. And so when I look at the governor here in Oregon, I mean, I'm just looking locally. I mean, I'm sure this is the same thing that's happening throughout many states. It seemed like there's something, I was reading something similar about California doing this. But our governor, and this is just mind-blowing, it's hard for me to wrap my head around this, because every time I read something on this, it's $1.2 billion. Here, Oregon is a tiny little state. Like, we're not, like, as far as, like, I mean, we're not tiny, but we have like 3 electoral votes, right? I mean, we're not a significant state here. And we're going to put $1.2 billion towards facilities and efforts and administrations and all kinds of stuff to deal with homeless. And so I looked up how many homeless people there are in Oregon. And there was like 14,000 something. I said, okay, 15,000, right? There's 15,000 homeless people in Oregon, and you're going to put $1.2 billion towards it. This is like somewhere between $80,000 to $100,000 per homeless person. And I'm thinking, holy crap, what a waste. Most of this is probably going to go to administration stuff, right? It's going to go to anything except for the actual end result of helping homeless people. I mean, I'm sure a little bit will get there, but most of this is going to get tied up in other stuff, right? Paying people to shuffle paperwork and see if things are being spent properly or whatever. I mean, so much money is going to get wasted doing this. And really, ultimately, what it comes down to is that it's not a matter of trying to put somebody in a house, right? You take somebody, you're like, hey, man, oh, dude, you're on the street. Oh, man, here, let me put you in a house. There you are, you're in a house. Isn't that great? Now, how is it that you're going to continue to make the payments on this house, right? The rent, the electricity. Oh, we might have to do that for you. That's where the $80,000 comes in. Well, what about furnishing? What about towels? What about all the, stuff that you need, a new toaster, right? All the stuff. A household has stuff in it. Believe me, I just moved into a house and I didn't have a whole lot of stuff. I'm trying to deal with the fact that I don't have a lot of stuff in this house and trying to replace it all, right? It's difficult. And unless you have like a job and you're working it and you're doing it and making it happen, which then, if that's the case, then you wouldn't probably necessarily need somebody providing that stuff for you, right? Nor would you get it, because if you are in that position, you're probably finding an apartment, finding something, struggling, but making it, right? It's because you can't hand it over. As soon as you hand it over to this guy, it's going to immediately deteriorate until he's back out on the street again, because mentally they're not there. If they were, they would be doing it. So instead of trying to build facilities that is going to appropriately find beds and places and stuff for all these homeless people to be, you got to figure out why it is they're on the streets to begin with, right? And most likely that's probably the way they are thinking, the thoughts that they have, because of the way that they were raised, some of the impacts that they have had, the mental deteriorations, the mental health sickness, the disabilities. There is a lot of stuff that is out there. And although some of these things, these physical disabilities, may be more difficult to deal with than others, but there is a lot of it that comes down to drug abuse that can be dealt with. The moment that somebody wants to buy a house, right? Well, then they have to know the steps that it takes to get there. And part of that is sobering up. I know it was for me. Like, my life deteriorated the more I drank. The moment that I gave up drinking, the little tiny baby steps that started coming from that led me to where I am today. And I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I'm in a hell of a lot better position than I ever was, ever in my life, right? And I didn't have to do really much for it except for this: enjoy the things that I really enjoy in life, like following my passions and talking economics. You teach people how to do stuff like that. And I learn every day. I mean, every day I'm working on things that I, need to do in order to, have the great awakening to find out what it is to be me, I mean, all that stuff. Every day I work on these things. And if people who had no help in their life, who had no chance or whatever, changes the way they think and had some of, the inspirations that would lead them to a better life, that I know everybody can do it, right? Then we don't need to build facilities with beds in them. We need to build facilities with people in them who can then help other people begin to think in appropriate fashions, right? Not thinking deteriorating thoughts, but thinking, business thoughts, thinking about health, healthy thoughts, upkeeping, stuff like that. See, this is I don't know why this topic hits me so hard, right? And maybe it's because I guess I was so close to the gutter. And when I see like how many people out there who never experienced something of such deterioration in life, where you're just giving up and you just drink all the time and you're just trying to just, ignore all the problems or whatever. I mean, people who have never experienced that in their life have no idea on how hard it is to finally just say like, okay, I'm going to change the way I'm doing things so I can start finding a better life. And they have no clue. Like when you are in depression and it is deep and it is hard and you have no help and there's no support or nothing like that, it is almost impossible. Right? I don't care how many houses people give you, it's not going to work. Right? All right. Uneducated economist. Oops. You let me know.